Brookie Lee West. Brookie Lee West was born in 1953 and experienced a troubled upbringing. Her parents struggled with substance issues and often left her alone for extended periods. When West was 7 years old, her mother was imprisoned for attempted harm against someone. Despite these challenges, West served in the Army and built a life in Las Vegas. Though her relationship with her mother, Christine Smith, remained complicated. Christine Smith was 64 years old in February 1998 and lived in Las Vegas. She had struggled with substance issues throughout her life and also had respiratory problems. Smith received $1,000 monthly in Social Security benefits, money that would become central to what happened next. In February 1998, Christine Smith disappeared. West told people that her mother had died naturally and been sent to California to live with her brother. However, Smith's brother had no knowledge of these plans, and Smith never arrived in California. Meanwhile, West continued collecting her mother's Social Security checks, depositing them and using the money for her own expenses. West had rented a storage unit in Las Vegas under both her name and her mother's name. For 3 years, the storage unit sat undisturbed, its contents a secret known only to West. She maintained the rental payments and gave no indication that anything unusual was inside. The unit appeared to be just another storage space among thousands in the Las Vegas area. On February 5, 2001, workers at the storage facility noticed a foul odor coming from West's unit. When authorities investigated, they discovered Christine Smith's body sealed inside a garbage can. The body had been wrapped in plastic and sealed so tightly that virtually no air could enter or escape. The condition of the remains would become crucial evidence in determining what had happened. The investigation revealed that West's fingerprint was found on the cellophane wrap surrounding the garbage can. Additionally, financial records showed that West had been making ATM withdrawals and cashing checks from Smith's account long after Smith's disappearance. These facts established West's connection to both the body and the financial motive. The forensic investigation included groundbreaking work by entomologist Neil Haskell. Haskell examined the insects found with the body and made a crucial discovery. The presence of coffin flies and the absence of blowflies indicated that the body had been sealed in the container immediately after death, or possibly while Smith was still alive. This finding directly contradicted West's claim that her mother had died naturally. Haskell explained his findings to investigators, stating, "We knew it was a long time since Mom had been seen. That showed me that West had to have lied." The forensic entomology evidence was presented at trial and helped establish that Smith's death was not natural, that West had taken deliberate steps to conceal the body immediately. West was arrested in September 2001. Her trial took place in July 2001 and featured the forensic entomology evidence alongside the financial records and physical evidence. The prosecution argued that West had ended her mother's life to continue collecting the Social Security benefits, then concealed the body in a way that prevented discovery for years. The jury deliberated briefly before finding West guilty of first-degree charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. West appealed her conviction in 2003, arguing various issues with the trial, but her appeal was denied, with the court finding sufficient evidence of her actions. In 2012, West attempted to escape from the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center by disguising herself, but the attempt was unsuccessful. She remains incarcerated at the same facility, serving her life sentence. Investigators have suspected West in other deaths as well, including her husband's passing in 1994 and her brother's disappearance in 1993, though she has only been convicted in connection with her mother's case. from a case solved by insects to one driven by teenage jealousy. Tony Fratto. On March 3, 2011, 16-year-old Michaela Costanzo, known as Mickey, was abducted after school in West Wendover, Nevada. Tony Fratto and her boyfriend Cody Patton kidnapped Costanzo and drove her to a remote desert location near the Utah border. What happened next would shock the small community and result in life sentences for both perpetrators. At the desert location, which had been prepared in advance with a shallow grave, Patton and Fratto attacked Costanzo with a shovel and took her life. The attack was prolonged and brutal, with Costanzo suffering greatly before her death. The premeditation was clear. The grave had been dug beforehand, indicating this was planned rather than spontaneous. The motive centered on jealousy and possessiveness. Costanzo had been texting Patton, who was Fratto's boyfriend and also Costanzo's ex-boyfriend. Fratto became consumed with fear that Patton and Costanzo might reconcile their relationship, and she couldn't tolerate the idea of losing Patton to her rival. The texts between Costanzo and Patton, while apparently innocent, triggered an extreme and fatal reaction. The investigation began when Costanzo's family reported her missing. In April 2011, Fratto confessed to authorities, providing details about the crime that only someone present could have known. She described using the shovel and revealed the location of Costanzo's body. Her confession led to the recovery of Costanzo's remains and the arrest of both Fratto and Patton. Fratto's defense team attempted to portray her as someone who had been manipulated and controlled by the possessive Patton. They argued that Patton had influenced her actions and that she had been under his psychological control. However, the evidence suggested that Fratto had been an active and willing participant in the planning and execution of the crime. Rather than face trial, Fratto accepted a plea agreement in January 2012, pleading guilty to second-degree charges. As part of the agreement, she testified against Patton at his trial. Patton was convicted and received life in prison without the possibility of parole, reflecting his role as the primary instigator and his previous criminal history. In April 2012, Fratto was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Judge Daniel Papez described the crime as violent a murder as I've seen, emphasizing the brutality of what had been done to Costanzo. Despite Fratto's cooperation and guilty plea, the judge felt the severity of the crime warranted a life sentence. During sentencing, Fratto addressed the court and Costanzo's family, saying, "I'm sorry for what I did and for what I did not do. Protect Michaela." This statement acknowledged both her active participation in the crime and her failure to prevent Patton from carrying it out. Costanzo's mother spoke about her devastating loss, stating, "There's a part of me that's just been ripped away," expressing the permanent damage done to their family. Fratto became eligible for parole after 18 years and had a parole hearing in 2021, which was denied. She had another hearing in February 2024, which was also denied. She remains incarcerated at the Southern Nevada Women's Correctional Center, with future parole hearings possible as she continues serving her sentence. While jealousy motivated one case, the next involved retaliation over a transaction gone wrong. Monique Maestas. In January 2003, 16-year-old Monique Maestas and her 19-year-old brother Beau committed an act that shocked Mesquite, Nevada. The siblings attacked two young sisters in their home while the parents were away. 3-year-old Christiana Cowan lost her life, while 6-year-old Brittany Bergeron survived but was left with permanent injuries, including paralysis. The motive for the attack was retaliation. The Maestas siblings believed the girls' parents had sold them salt instead of the substance they thought they were purchasing. The transaction had been for $125, a relatively small amount that would lead to devastating consequences. The siblings decided that the appropriate response to being deceived in this transaction was to harm the children. The attack was brutal and showed no mercy for the young victims. The siblings used knives and inflicted over 20 stab wounds. Brittany Bergeron's spinal cord was severed, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. Christiana suffered fatal injuries. After the attack, the Maesta siblings fled the scene, discarding evidence, including the knives and their clothing. The investigation moved quickly. Beau's girlfriend identified the siblings to authorities, providing crucial information about what had happened. Monique confessed to her role, telling investigators, "I just kept stabbing her," describing her actions against one of the victims. The confession, combined with physical evidence and witness testimony, built a strong case against both siblings. Perhaps most disturbing was a letter Beau wrote while in custody, in which he referred to slaughtering those little piggies. The callous language and apparent lack of remorse demonstrated a shocking disregard for the humanity of the victims. The letter became powerful evidence of the siblings' mindset and their attitudes toward what they had done. Both Monique and Beau accepted plea agreements rather than face trial. Monique pleaded guilty and in 2006 was sentenced to 47 years to life in prison. Because she was under 18 at the time of the crimes, she was not eligible for the death penalty under Nevada law. Beau, being an adult, received a death sentence for his role in the attacks. During proceedings, defense attorneys presented information about the siblings' background. They had experienced significant difficulties in their upbringing, including mistreatment and exposure to harmful situations. However, prosecutors argued that regardless of their background, the decision to harm innocent young people over a minor financial dispute showed a level of depravity that warranted the harshest penalties. At sentencing, Monique addressed Brittany Bergeron, saying, "My heart goes out to you," attempting to express some level of remorse. However, prosecutors and the victim's family felt that no apology could adequately address the magnitude of what had been done. A prosecutor described the crime as horrific, especially given that it was all over $125. Monique Maestas remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, serving her sentence of 47 years to life. She will be eligible for parole consideration after serving the minimum term. But whether she will ever be released depends on parole board decisions weighing her conduct in prison and the severity of her original crimes. From targeting young people to a case of jealousy that ended in it taking a life. Brenda Stokes Wilson. On December 21, 2012, 50-year-old Brenda Stokes Wilson committed acts in Las Vegas that would result in her spending the rest of her life in prison. Wilson abducted 10-year-old Jade Morris and took her life, then attacked her co-worker, Joyce Rohn. The crimes were driven by jealousy and occurred on the same day, demonstrating a level of rage that shocked investigators. Wilson worked as a blackjack dealer at a Las Vegas casino and had become convinced that Rohn was in a romantic relationship with Jade Morris's father. This belief, whether accurate or not, consumed Wilson and led her to target both Rohn and the young person she associated with a perceived romantic rival. The jealousy transformed into a plan to eliminate what Wilson saw as threats or sources of her unhappiness. Wilson abducted Jade Morris and took her to a location where she attacked the young person with a knife, inflicting 40 wounds. The number and severity of wounds demonstrated extreme rage and a complete loss of control or disregard for human life. After ending Jade's life, Wilson then went to attack Rohn, slashing her face with a knife before fleeing. Wilson was arrested the same day as the crimes. Blood evidence found in her car linked her to Jade Morris, providing physical proof of her involvement. The evidence was overwhelming, including witness testimony, the recovered weapon, and the blood traces that placed Jade in Wilson's vehicle. Background information revealed that Wilson had overcome significant challenges in her own life. She had grown up on a plantation with a reportedly harsh father, experiencing difficulties that she had worked to overcome. She had built a career as a casino dealer, a position requiring skill and customer service abilities. However, these past challenges didn't excuse or explain the extreme nature of her crimes. Rather than face trial, Wilson accepted a guilty plea in 2016. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never be released. Prosecutor Robert Daskus stated, "There's nothing we can do to punish her enough," expressing the sentiment that no punishment could be proportionate to the crime of taking a young person's life. Jade Morris's mother spoke about her daughter, with her last words to Jade being, "Have fun, I love you," before Jade's final day. The statement captured the ordinary nature of their last interaction and the sudden, unexpected nature of the tragedy that followed. A mother saying goodbye for what she thought was a normal day, not knowing it would be the last time she would see her daughter. Wilson remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, where she will spend the rest of her natural life. From jealousy to a case that prosecutors would call the worst they had ever seen. Crystal Stevens. In July 2018, 4-year-old Brandon Steckler Jr. was in the care of Crystal Stevens in Las Vegas. Brandon had special needs, which should have meant he received extra care and attention. Instead, what happened to Brandon would be described by prosecutors as the worst case they had encountered in their careers. On July 10, 2018, Stevens called police claiming that Brandon had drowned in a bathtub. She presented the incident as a tragic accident, something that had happened despite her supervision. However, when medical examiners conducted an autopsy, they discovered the truth was far more disturbing than a simple drowning. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had suffered extensive harm over time, including burns, fractures, exposure to harmful substances, and signs of severe malnutrition. He also had developed a serious infection throughout his body. The drowning that Stevens reported appeared to be the final act in what had been an extended period of mistreatment. The medical evidence painted a picture of prolonged suffering. The investigation revealed that Brandon had been in Stevens' care as she served in a caregiver role for the young person with special needs. Rather than providing the care and protection he required, the evidence suggested Stevens had subjected him to conditions that led to his death. The specific motive for why Stevens had harmed Brandon remained unclear, though the pattern suggested frustration or inability to cope with caring for someone with special needs. The case proceeded through the legal system over several years. Stevens was charged with serious crimes related to Brandon's passing, and the prosecution built a case based on the autopsy findings and other evidence collected during the investigation. The extensive medical evidence made it clear that Brandon's death was not accidental. Rather than face trial, Stevens accepted a guilty plea. In May 2025, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence meant she would never be released, spending the rest of her life incarcerated for what she had done to Brandon. During sentencing, Stevens addressed the court, stating, "I'm terribly sorry for my horrific actions." The apology acknowledged the severity of what she had done, though no words could undo the suffering Brandon had endured. The prosecutor handling the case stated it was the worst child homicide I've ever had, emphasizing how this case stood out even among other tragic cases involving young victims. Stevens remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, where she will spend the remainder of her life. While one case involved a caregiver, the next would center on a step-parent relationship. Avriana Enoch. 5-year-old Callie Anderson lived with her father and stepmother, Avriana Enoch, in Nevada. In April 2018, Callie's body was discovered in a duffel bag that had been hidden in a storage unit. The discovery would lead to an investigation revealing severe neglect that had resulted in the young person's death. The autopsy showed that Callie had died from malnutrition, meaning she had not been provided adequate food over an extended period. Additional evidence suggested Callie had been kept in conditions that prevented her from accessing food or calling for help. The medical findings indicated this was not a sudden event, but rather the result of prolonged neglect. The investigation revealed disturbing details about Callie's living conditions. Evidence suggested she had been confined in ways that restricted her movement and access to basic necessities. The decision to hide her body in a storage unit after her death showed awareness that what had happened was criminal and an attempt to avoid detection. Enoch was arrested and charged in connection with Callie's death. The case proceeded to trial rather than being resolved through a plea agreement. The trial took place in 2021 and resulted in Enoch being found guilty. The jury heard evidence about Callie's condition, the circumstances of her death, and Enoch's role as her stepmother and caregiver. Enoch was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The sentence reflected the severity of allowing someone under her care to starve while taking steps to hide the body afterward. The possibility of parole after 20 years meant that Enoch could potentially be released someday, though that decision would depend on parole board evaluations of her conduct and rehabilitation. The case provided limited public statements from Enoch herself, with most of the information coming from court proceedings and investigative reports. The motive for why Callie was neglected to the point of death remained somewhat unclear, though the evidence clearly established that it had occurred under Enoch's care. Enoch remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, serving her life sentence with the possibility of parole after 2 decades. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From cases involving family members to one that occurred on a hiking trail. Samantha Moreno Rodriguez. Samantha Moreno Rodriguez was 35 years old and living in San Jose, California, when she traveled to the Las Vegas area in May 2021 with her 7-year-old son, Liam Husted. Liam had special needs that required additional care. Rodriguez had been his primary caregiver and was responsible for his daily needs. The trip to Las Vegas appeared to be unplanned, with Rodriguez leaving San Jose suddenly without notifying friends or family about her intentions or destination. On May 28, 2021, Rodriguez took Liam to the Mountain Springs area west of Las Vegas. The location was remote, situated in the desert landscape approximately 25 miles from the city. The area featured hiking trails, but had limited cell phone service and few visitors. Rodriguez chose this isolated location for reasons that would become clear. The Mountain Springs trailhead is accessed by a winding road through rocky terrain, far from the tourist areas of Las Vegas. The isolation meant no witnesses would be present and help would not be readily available. During the hike, Liam began making loud sounds, which apparently caused Rodriguez frustration. For people with special needs, vocalizations can indicate distress or sensory overload. The heat, unfamiliar surroundings, or physical exertion may have triggered Liam's reaction. The temperature in the desert area regularly exceeds 100 degrees in summer months. Rather than taking a break, finding shade, returning to their vehicle, or using calming techniques, Rodriguez made a decision that would end Liam's life. The remote location meant no one was nearby to intervene or offer assistance or witness what happened next. Rodriguez strangled Liam and left his body on the trail. She removed his clothing and left him exposed to the elements in the desert heat. Other hikers discovered the body later that day and immediately contacted law enforcement. The discovery of a young person's body in such a remote location triggered an immediate investigation with multiple agencies responding. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department detectives responded to the scene and began processing evidence. The Clark County Coroner's Office was called to examine the body and determine cause of death. Detectives worked to identify the victim through missing persons reports and physical evidence found at the scene. They canvassed the area for additional witnesses who might have seen Rodriguez and Liam earlier in the day. Surveillance footage from gas stations and convenience stores along the route to Mountain Springs helped establish their movements and timeline. Traffic cameras captured Rodriguez's vehicle traveling toward the area. Investigators established that Rodriguez had been with Liam based on witness statements from people who had seen them together earlier that day at various locations, including a store where Rodriguez purchased water. They tracked her movement through surveillance footage, cell phone records, and financial transactions. Credit card purchases showed stops at specific gas stations. ATM withdrawals provided timestamps, and gas station receipts created a detailed trail. Cell phone tower data plotted her route from Las Vegas toward Denver. Rodriguez had fled to Denver, Colorado, immediately after leaving the Mountain Springs area. She drove through the night without stopping for rest, covering hundreds of miles across multiple states. The interstate flight raised immediate red flags for investigators who were trying to locate her for questioning. Multi-state warrants were issued, and law enforcement agencies across state lines were alerted to be on the lookout for her vehicle. Before her arrest, Rodriguez made contact with someone. She left a voicemail message stating, "I'm sorry, I had to do this." This message became crucial evidence. The apology combined with the phrase, "I had to do this," suggested both consciousness of wrongdoing and a claim of necessity that prosecutors would later challenge. The voicemail was preserved and would be played during court proceedings. Police located Rodriguez in Denver through cooperation with Colorado law enforcement. She was arrested without incident at a hotel. She was extradited back to Nevada to face charges. The evidence against her included the voicemail confession, her documented flight across state lines, forensic evidence from the scene linking her to Liam, witness statements placing them together, and the remote location suggesting planning rather than impulse. Rodriguez accepted a plea agreement in 2022, pleading guilty to second-degree charges. The plea deal allowed her to avoid first-degree charges and a potential life without parole sentence. Prosecutors likely accepted the plea to spare Liam's family from a lengthy trial, where graphic details would be presented and they would have to testify. She was sentenced to 28 years to life in prison. She must serve a minimum of 28 years before parole consideration. Rodriguez remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. Her earliest possible release date would be in her 60s. Liam's father and other family members attended the sentencing hearing. While one case involved a hiking trip, the next centered on insurance money and an affair. Michelle Payet. Michelle Payet was married to Nathan Payet, a United States Air Force member stationed at Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas. The couple had been high school sweethearts, building their relationship from teenage years through young adulthood. Nathan served his country while Michelle managed their home and family life. They had children together, and from the outside appeared to be a stable military family. However, The Payetti family was experiencing financial difficulties with mounting debts. Credit cards, loans, and other obligations had accumulated to tens of thousands of dollars. The financial stress put pressure on their marriage. Bills were overdue, collection calls were frequent, and the couple argued about money regularly. Michelle had also become involved with another man named Michael Rodriguez, creating a complicated and dangerous situation. Nathan carried a life insurance policy worth $650,000, standard coverage for military members who wanted to ensure their families would be financially secure. The combination of Michelle's affair with Rodriguez, the crushing debt, and the insurance payout created the motive. On December 7, 2010, Nathan was shot multiple times in the garage of the family's Las Vegas home. He was struck by several bullets. The scene was staged to appear as a robbery or random attack. Investigators who responded identified inconsistencies immediately. The staging didn't match typical robbery patterns. Nathan's wallet remained in his pocket with cash and credit cards untouched. Nothing of value was missing from the home. Electronics, jewelry, and other items remained in place. These details raised suspicions of an inside job rather than an external intruder. Detectives began examining the Payetts' personal and financial circumstances closely. They discovered the affair between Michelle and Rodriguez through phone records and witness interviews. Friends and family members confirmed the relationship had been ongoing for months. Text messages between the two showed communication suggesting coordination and planning. While carefully worded to avoid explicit admissions, the pattern and timing indicated they were working together toward a common goal. Messages sent before and after the shooting were particularly damning. Michelle's alibi for the time of the shooting fell apart as detectives traced her movements through cell tower data and security footage. She claimed to have been at one location, but phone records showed her phone pinging towers near the family home. Security cameras from nearby businesses captured her vehicle in the area. The contradictions between her statements and the physical evidence mounted. The $650,000 insurance policy provided clear financial motive. Investigators also found evidence that Michelle had been researching the policy payout process before Nathan's passing. Digital forensics revealed internet searches related to insurance claims and how quickly payouts occurred. She had contacted the insurance company weeks before the shooting, asking questions about the policy. The combination of affair, crushing financial problems, and insurance money painted a clear picture of conspiracy. Both Michelle and Rodriguez were arrested and charged with conspiracy, facilitation, and other offenses related to Nathan's passing. The prosecution argued they had conspired together to end Nathan's life for the insurance money that would solve Michelle's financial problems and allow her to be with Rodriguez. Michelle accepted a plea agreement in 2016, pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. Rodriguez also pleaded guilty to his role in the plot. Michelle was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During proceedings, Michelle stated, "I made a huge mistake and a really bad choice." Prosecutors argued this language minimized the premeditated conspiracy to take Nathan's life for financial gain, characterizing months of planning as simply a mistake. Nathan's military service had been dedicated to protecting others and serving his country with honor. His family attended sentencing proceedings and spoke about their loss and betrayal. Nathan's parents described him as a devoted father and dedicated airman. The $650,000 Michelle hoped to collect never reached her. Instead, it provided evidence of motive in her prosecution. Michelle Payette remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, where she will spend the rest of her life. From conspiracy for insurance money to a custody dispute that turned deadly, Catherine Fletcher. Catherine Fletcher was involved in a lengthy and contentious custody dispute with her former partner Robert Trask over their young offspring. Fletcher had prior convictions for neglect and burglary. These criminal convictions had significantly impacted custody determinations, with the court viewing them as evidence of poor judgment and potential risk. She had made repeated allegations against Trask as part of attempting to regain custody. These accusations spanned months and included various claims. None of the accusations had succeeded in changing the custody arrangement that favored Trask. Court records showed Fletcher had filed multiple motions and complaints through her attorney. She alleged Trask was unfit, dangerous, or neglectful in numerous ways. Each allegation was investigated by Child Protective Services or court-appointed evaluators. Investigations into these claims had not substantiated her allegations. No evidence supported her accusations. The court continued to maintain the existing custody arrangement despite Fletcher's repeated attempts to modify it. Fletcher's frustration with the legal process apparently grew over time as each motion failed. On July 16, 2016, Fletcher arranged to meet Trask at Oxbow Nature Study Area in Reno, a public park. Their young offspring was present during this meeting. The park meeting appeared to be for a custody exchange or to discuss custody matters. They met in the parking area of the park in daylight. During the encounter, Fletcher produced a handgun and shot Trask in the back, ending his life. Trask was struck by multiple bullets and died at the scene. The young person who witnessed the shooting immediately became a key witness despite the enormous trauma. Police arrived quickly after receiving calls about shots fired. The youngster provided detailed information to investigators about what had occurred. The eyewitness account established Fletcher as the shooter beyond any doubt. Evidence showed Fletcher had purchased the firearm used in the shooting just days before the incident. Gun store records with her signature, background check documentation showing she passed the required checks, and sales receipts with serial numbers connected Fletcher to the weapon used. Fletcher was arrested shortly after the shooting and charged with first-degree offenses. The eyewitness account, weapon purchase records showing recent acquisition, and documented custody dispute motive built the prosecution's comprehensive case. Forensic evidence from the scene matched the weapon Fletcher had purchased. Ballistics testing confirmed the bullets recovered from Trask's body came from her gun. Gunshot residue found on Fletcher's hands and clothing further linked her to the shooting. The case went to trial in 2020 before a jury. The defense had attempted to argue temporary insanity or extreme emotional disturbance caused by the stress of the custody battle. Defense psychiatrists testified about Fletcher's mental state. However, the jury rejected these arguments after hearing evidence of the firearm purchased days earlier, suggesting premeditation rather than spontaneous loss of control. The jury found Fletcher guilty of first-degree charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge cited the premeditated nature of the crime, the weapon purchase, and the fact that Fletcher's own offspring witnessed the shooting. Catherine Fletcher remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center. She will never be released. The youngster who witnessed the shooting lost both parents that day, one to death and one to incarceration. Family members of both Fletcher and Trask continue to deal with the aftermath. Trask's parents are raising the youngster who witnessed their father's shooting. While custody motivated one case, financial crimes drove the next. Karen Bodden. Karen Bodden was married to Rob Bodden in Nevada. Karen had been involved in taking funds through embezzlement from accounts she had access to. The amounts were significant, tens of thousands of dollars over an extended period there was growing risk of discovery as financial audits were approaching that would expose the missing funds. Rob worked in aviation and had access to financial records that could reveal Karen's activities. On August 24, 2006, Rob Bodden was shot at a hangar where he worked. The location was remote and provided privacy with few witnesses around. After the shooting, Karen disposed of Rob's body in the desert east of Carson City. She selected a location far from populated areas where the body might not be discovered for weeks or months, buying time before investigation began. Rob was reported missing by concerned family members and co-workers when he failed to show up for work and couldn't be reached. The investigation began as a missing person case with detectives following standard protocols. Detectives interviewed Karen, who claimed Rob had left voluntarily after an argument. She said they had argued about money and he had driven away angry. She suggested he might have gone to stay with friends or family. However, inconsistencies in her story raised suspicions among investigators familiar with domestic cases. The investigation collected circumstantial evidence that built over time. Authorities found evidence of forgery and financial irregularities connected to Karen. Bank records showed unauthorized transfers from accounts Rob controlled. Signatures on checks didn't match Rob's known handwriting when examined by forensic document examiners. The embezzlement scheme began to unravel as investigators dug deeper into financial records. When Rob's body was discovered by hikers in the desert weeks later, the missing person case became a homicide investigation with new urgency. Forensic analysis of the crime scene and body provided additional evidence linking Karen to the crime. Bullet trajectory analysis suggested Rob had been shot while in a vulnerable position, possibly from behind. The prosecution argued Karen had taken Rob's life to prevent discovery of her embezzlement. His knowledge of the finances made him a direct threat to her freedom, providing clear motive. If he discovered the missing funds, he would report her to authorities, leading to prosecution. Karen maintained her innocence throughout proceedings, refusing to accept responsibility. She claimed she had no involvement in Rob's disappearance or death. Her defense team argued the circumstantial evidence was insufficient for conviction. They suggested other suspects with potential motives, pointing to Rob's business dealings and suggesting enemies. However, the jury found the accumulated circumstantial evidence compelling enough to convict beyond reasonable doubt. In 2008, she was convicted of first-degree offenses after a jury trial. The judge described the crime as an execution-style slaying during sentencing, using terminology that emphasized the deliberate and cold-blooded nature of the shooting. Karen was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 24 years. Karen appealed her conviction on multiple grounds, but in 2010, the Nevada Supreme Court upheld it. The appellate court reviewed the trial record and found the circumstantial evidence adequate to support the verdict. The court ruled that when circumstantial evidence is viewed as a whole, it can support conviction even without direct evidence like eyewitnesses. In 2021, Karen was granted authorization for new DNA testing on hair evidence found at the crime scene. The testing was conducted on hair samples using modern DNA analysis techniques not available at the time of trial. As of 2025, no outcomes from these tests have changed her conviction or sentence. Karen Bodden remains incarcerated at Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center serving her life sentence. She will be eligible for parole consideration around 2032 after serving 24 years. Whether she is released will depend on parole board evaluation of her conduct in prison, rehabilitation efforts, acceptance of responsibility, and whether she continues to pose danger to society. From embezzlement cover-up to a case involving accomplices and electrocution. Janine Hillman. In 1987, Janine Hillman paid accomplices to take the life of Valentine Galeron, a former Sparks City councilman who had served his community in local government. The method chosen was electrocution in a bathtub, an unusual approach. An electrical appliance was placed in water while Galeron bathed, causing fatal electrocution. The method was specifically designed to appear accidental, rather than intentional harm, hoping to avoid investigation. The motive was financial gain through access to checks and accounts Galeron controlled. Hillman stood to benefit financially from Galeron's passing in specific ways. She would gain access to funds she could not access while he lived, including accounts and regular payments. Rather than commit the act herself and risk direct connection, Hillman recruited others to carry out the actual electrocution while she maintained distance. Hillman found individuals willing to participate for promised payment. She provided them with detailed information about Galeron's daily routine, home layout, security measures, and when he would be most vulnerable. She supplied the electrical device to be used and gave specific instructions on how to stage it as an accidental electrocution. The accomplices gained entry to Galeron's home and executed the plan as instructed. Initially, Galeron's passing was investigated as an accidental electrocution by local authorities. Bathroom electrocutions, while rare, do occur through appliance malfunctions or careless use of electronics near water. Investigators initially had no reason to suspect foul play. However, certain elements didn't quite fit the accidental scenario. The electrical device positioning seemed deliberate rather than accidental. Witness accounts of unfamiliar people near Galeron's home around the estimated time of death raised questions that prompted deeper investigation. The investigation benefited significantly from accomplices who became concerned about serious legal consequences they faced. Those who carried out the electrocution accepted plea agreements in exchange for testimony and testified against Hillman. They explained in detail the recruitment process, specific payments Hillman had promised, and exact execution details, including how to stage the scene. Their testimony established Hillman as the mastermind who organized every aspect of the crime, from planning to cover-up. Hillman was charged as the principal conspirator and mastermind. The case went to trial with accomplice testimony forming the foundation of the prosecution's case. The jury heard detailed accounts of how Hillman orchestrated the entire plot, step by step. Evidence showed she stood to gain financially and substantially from Galeron's passing. The unusual electrocution method and deliberate attempt to make it appear accidental demonstrated extensive planning and criminal sophistication. The jury found Hillman guilty of first-degree charges, and in 1988 she was sentenced to 2 life sentences to run consecutively. The double life sentences reflected both the seriousness of taking a former public servant's life and her role as organizer rather than simply participant. She would spend the following decades incarcerated in Nevada's prison system with no realistic prospect of release. Hillman remained in prison for nearly 30 years before passing away in 2017 at age 85 while still incarcerated. She spent her final 3 decades behind bars for organizing Galeron's electrocution. She never expressed public remorse for the crime or accepted responsibility. Limited information exists in public records about her thoughts or statements regarding the crime she orchestrated during her decades of incarceration. The case involved several unusual elements that made it notable. The electrocution method rarely seen in homicides, deliberate use of accomplices while Hillman maintained distance and deniability, and targeting of a former public official who had served his community. Galeron had served Sparks as a city councilman for years, contributing to his community's governance and betterment. His passing by someone seeking financial gain was particularly troubling to residents who had known and respected him. this was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.